Hi everyone, so I'm not bragging, but I've been running this channel for about 10 years, made hundreds of videos, had millions of views and responded to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of comments, and one thing I've learned, everybody has a different opinion and everybody thinks they're right. And what that tells you is that there is never going to be one solution that's going to keep everybody happy. What you're going to get is a compromise. You're going to get a compromise between different competing interests that people have. Now, in terms of fuel, it's always going to be a compromise. There isn't the perfect fuel, unfortunately. And one of the best compromises I've come across is this stuff. It's methanol. Methanol is tremendous. It's been known about for centuries. It was the Egyptians who first used it. They got it from pyrolysis of wood. Then they used it in embalming. But it was in 1661 that Robert Boyle identified it. There are two main ways of getting this stuff. One is the old-fashioned way where you distill it from wood. And you can actually still do that at home, and I might do a video on how to make your own methanol at home. The other way was invented by a French chemist, Paul Sabatier, in 1905, where you take syngas, pass it over a catalyst, which is usually zinc or copper, and it'll produce methanol. Syngas is that product of gasification of wood that was used extensively in World War II for running cars. But that syngas method was picked up by BASF in 1923 and produced en masse in Germany for the very first time. And now, of course, it's something like 20 million metric tons of this stuff are produced because it's an important precursor to lots of other stuff, like formaldehyde and acetic acid, for example. It was the fuel of choice for the giant Nazi war machine during World War II when it was called M-Stoff, and there were several rocket designs. They mixed it with hydrazine, which called it C-Stoff, and it kind of fell out of favour until the 1970s, of course, when we had the dreadful fuel crisis, and manufacturers of cars were looking at flexible fuel vehicles, because this stuff will run in your car with only minor modifications. In fact, in modern cars using injection, it's just a tweak to your software will get it to run on methanol. Methanol is the choice for fuel cells because it will run at low temperature and atmospheric pressure, producing electricity. Similar to high-octane gasoline in terms of its horsepower, but it's less energy dense, so of course you're going to have more fill-ups per 300 miles or so. It was called methyl alcohol, or methyl hydrate, and the Canadians still use that term, but in 1840 its official name became methanol. People often confuse it with ethanol for some reason. Ethanol is the stuff, because we drink by the gallon. This stuff, if you drink it, it'll send you blind. But it isn't ethanol, it's methanol. Methylated spirits is ethanol with methanol in it, about 3% or so. So there's a deal of confusion between the two alcohols, which one is which. But this one is wood alcohol, not the stuff we drink, and the official name is methanol. So clearly, a material with a long-standing history that is relatively easy to make at home and produced on an industrial scale. So what are some of the advantages? First advantage really has got to be in the production. I mean, we make it from syngas, which is the gasification of biomass. So ultimately renewable material that doesn't use a food product as set against ethanol, 80% of which is by brewing through corn. This one is just using biomass that we can break down to synthesize it over a catalyst. So easy to do. Renewable resources, very cheap in situ production methodology, where we can produce this by megatons. Now, in terms of toxicity in the environment, actually it's quite astounding. If you spill this stuff on the ground, it'll hang around for about between 1 and 7 days. Set that against gasoline, which is in the order of hundreds of days, then this, environmentally, is not that toxic. And that's because there are bacteria that digest this stuff. In fact, we have them in our bodies. If you eat a kilogram of apples, which got pectin in them, you'll produce about 0.6 grams of methanol in your body, and you breathe out on average 4 parts per million in your breath. So the environment can actually cope with this. In fact, plants produce methanol. It's been estimated somewhere between 150 and 250 million tonnes of ethanol are produced by plants globally every year. That's about 3 times the amount that we produce industrially. I suppose that's why it's used as an antifreeze in pipelines and in windscreen washer fluid, or at least in the rest of the world. In the EU they banned it because in 2012 some guy in the Czech Republic drank himself to death on windshield washer fluid. All of that is very interesting, but we're interested in it as a fuel, and of course it's already used as a fuel. The marine industry use it because it can be used directly in a high performance diesel engine, and there's no sulfur emissions, there's no particulate emissions, there's no nitrous oxide emissions. It's a very clean fuel, and with the pressure on the marine industry to clean up, this has become one of the favourite things to use, and we have a methanol economy going on. And the advantage of methanol in that economy is that we're used to handling liquid fuels. We have a ton of pump stations around the place. We're really used to piping it and carrying it. So the fact that it's a liquid fuel in that form, the same form of gasoline, of course, is a huge reduction in infrastructure costs. And this, remember, with a tweak to your software, can be used directly in the car. So the on-costs of changing to methanol are insignificant, especially if you compare them to the on-costs of changing something like hydrogen or liquid petroleum gas fuel or even EVs, electric vehicles. The amount we're going to have to pay for generation and installation of the infrastructure to make that transition is enormous, whereas the amount we'd have to pay to make a transition to this is insignificant. There's 2 main disadvantages to it. The first one is its energy density. It's about 15 megajoules per litre, whereas ethanol is about 24 megajoules and gasoline is about 33 megajoules. So the energy density is much lower. But remember I talked earlier about coming to a compromise. Compromise always requires you give up something. So in terms of its ease of production, its ease of integration, its lack of toxicity in the environment, I would say filling up your car a little more regularly than you do was a price worth paying perhaps. But it is still a major disadvantage that methanol has, is the energy density is that much lower. The other issue is the toxicity. Because the overwhelming statistic for this is the people who die from this is not from adsorption through the skin, is they drink it. Now they don't drink it on deliberately, they don't grab a bottle of this stuff and swig it back. It is found in normal alcohol. They use an adulterating agent. It can be by mistake, it can be by poor production, or it can be deliberately added. And a lot of methanol deaths occurred during Prohibition because this stuff was put into alcohol. I couldn't find a statistic for any other method of death. It was only drinking it. It is absorbed through the skin, but it was only drinking it that I could find. Of the people who died, 95% of them are men. So I suppose that says something about men as opposed to women when it comes to drinking. But those are the statistics for the death of this stuff. Now this stuff is a fuel, so it does vaporize. It's heavier than air, so it does collect, and it will explode on a spark, just like gasoline. And of course we're tremendously used to using gasoline, and this stuff is used. It's used in boat heaters, and of course campers the world over use it. So it's the same sensible precautions that you're going to be using when you're using pretty much any fuel, including the stuff that you've got in your car. And it frequently astounds me how people will put 40 to 60 litres and travel at 80 miles an hour in what is effectively a bomb and not even worry about it, but you give them a cupful of this and they'll throw their hands in the air in horror. This is like any other liquid fuel. You need to treat it with the precautions you would treat it with. In terms of its poisoning, as I say, we're extremely aware of it because it's mixed with ordinary alcohol. But in summary, in terms of its cost, it's actually comparable. But dropping it in to replace gasoline, of course, the infrastructure's already there and it can be done easily. Its environmental impact is extremely low for any fuel that we're going to give. And of course, its emissions are water and carbon dioxide. But those are the emissions from it. Now, set against that, obviously, are, well, the energy density and the fears of toxicity. Now, I think, in my mind, like I say, it's a compromise between the pluses and the minuses of any particular thing. And the negatives of this, I don't think outweigh the positives of it. And the fact that you can produce this at home, I find absolutely fascinating. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you're a methanol convert, and we're going to be using it for our heating, and I'm probably going to do a video on how to make it yourself. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching, and please do remember to like and subscribe.